that's named after a country. Very nice. Very nice. Welcome. Well, my name is Richard Wright, and I am your professor for the next 4 weeks, 4.5 weeks, roughly, before this course is over. And this is drugs and crime. And I will remind you, and I'll probably say it 100 times or more, that this course is called Drugs and Crime because the reason why, one of the reasons why our crime is so high in this country is because not the pandemic, but because of drugs. Individuals commit crimes to support their drug habits, and consequently, their thing is not to hurt anybody. Their thing is not to um, do anything, even considered as quote illegal, because these are individuals who have an illness, and that is that they are hooked on these drugs. That is also part of uh, the so-called dealers or distributors. They prey upon those individuals. And so you're going to learn in this course uh, that my position is very clear based upon my experience as a police officer and investigator, one who has a certificate, three certificates involving law enforcement and drugs and gangs and things like that. You're going to hear something tonight about gangs and cocaine. I was the village attorney in the south suburbs of Chicago called Ford Heights. It was called the crack cocaine capital of the south suburbs. And there was a lot of that out there and still is. And I was also a defense lawyer most of my career, where I actually defended individuals. And we spent a lot of time um, dealing with the issue of individuals who commit crimes because of their drug habits, and that um, some lost their lives committing crimes because of their drug habits. Um, and so I have a baby sister who I will talk about. She overdosed on cocaine. One of the toughest things I had to do in '94 was eulogize my baby sister. And if you listen to my story, Adversity is a Springboard to Success, which those of you who have not had a chance to, I encourage you to listen to it. You'll hear the tough challenges that I went through. I never had to deal with drugs myself, but I've had it around me and people. So it's important. And so I want you to understand that by the time this course ends, you will probably have a perspective as a law enforcement person or person who's going into being a probation or parole officer or in becoming a corrections officer, whatever areas you work in, social work, or what, you'll recognize the fact that you're operating almost the same way as the people in the health sciences because of the fact that you're going to be doing some counseling and things of that nature. So I've kind of jumped into the lecture a little bit, but let's get into sharing my screen here. I do want to remind you, uh, so that you'll know, is that those who have not submitted their assignments for week one, and if you look at week one's assignment, you have not, as of Monday, you got zeros. Those are not your final grades. They could be if you don't submit an assignment. But I had a student that requested uh, why she got a zero when she submitted her assignment one day late, and that what about the 10% penalty. And I explained to her is I'll explain to you guys that every Monday after assignments are due, I go back and I see who has not turned them in. And I put zeros in for two reasons. Number one, well, first of all, the school requires it. But the reason why the school requires it is so that the advisors will see that that individual or those individuals have not participated or done anything uh, as far as written assignments are concerned, or taken a test, if there was a test or a quiz. And then sometimes it goes to discussion posts, which, as you know, end on Saturday night. But that Monday, the zero that goes in it should get your attention, and you can get your assignments in. And yes, the rule is you have up to 7 days, but I already addressed that during week one, that don't get comfortable with that. But the point of the matter is that uh, student says, well, um, and you may not even get any points off when I go back and grade them, depending on the situation. Remember, I said I need to know why it is that your assignments are late. If you have extenuating circumstances, and and a lot of students don't tell me. So if you do, I don't know. I had a student that told me she had COVID last term, but she didn't let me know until week 5 or 6, but she said she had it early in the term. I didn't know, so nothing I could do to help at that particular point. The point of the matter is that that zero is subject to change if you turn in your assignments. Okay, so I just wanted to say that. I will be grading your assignments by Friday of this week. Every Friday by 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time, your your grades are due in, except when we get to week 6, that's a different scenario. But weeks 1, 2, 3, 4, and well, not necessarily even 5, because 5 is a little different. So, but um, 1 through 4 for sure. And I encourage you to read the rubric. I have comments that I put in the grade book rubric. If you got a 55, for example, that probably means you didn't have any citations in the body or credible sources. Or you might have it because you got hit with a Grammarly hit. Remember, I told you, I says run your papers through Grammarly before you submit them and check the plagiarism box. So I'm just trying to get some students on track um, for the rest of the term so that you can get done what needs to be done. Student said that they didn't know that those zeros were not final grades. Well, it it it, it is quite clear that we don't hold it open until the 7 days. And also, it should come to your attention that once we put the zero in, it gives you your GPA. If we don't put anything in, it won't give you a GPA. And so you need to be aware of that as well. So that's just something I'm saying this week. I'm not going to repeat it every week um, because I want you to be sure that you understand what those zeros are all about. Okay, let's get down to the calendar and let's take a look at that, because I got a video I want you to see today. So we are here. As you can see, this Tuesday, tonight, your initial post is due. Your live lecture takes place. Your reply post is due Saturday. And then Sunday, your written assignment and your quiz. And then the live classroom phrase. All right. So you want to be able to provide that information as well. Okay. And be aware that You look at this, you see your lectures again are on on Tuesdays. I'm sorry, on Tuesdays, every week. Then let's look at again. I still do it. The last day of class is the 18th of March, which is in 3 days will be 1 month. That's why I said the term goes very fast. Not the 19th, not the 20th. If you turn an assignment and it's after 12, all deals are off. All deals are off. Okay, I'm telling you that right now. All right. I had a student, and I'll just be honest with you, that had been doing pretty good, and the last day of class, their assignment was turned in like what was it? It went um, 12. Not even it wasn't. It was just it said it was so many seconds late, like 3 seconds late or something. So I didn't. I said that's rounded up to a minute. I'm not gonna uh, ignore that grade, and I did. And my dean, I told him what I did. He said that's no problem. Use your discretion because it's a hard and fast rule, but that made sense. Okay, but don't go using that. You'll be playing with fire. Okay, so now you see what the calendar says. Let's go to the content page. And let's go now and take a look at the discussion, not the discussion, the announcement. And you'll see that. Let's move this out of the way. And you'll see that we're going to deal with the legislation regulating drug use and abuse. Chapters 5 and 8 of the textbook. I sent you this corresponding PowerPoints. And then we're going to quickly go over the regulation of drug precursors, regulation of synthetic drugs, the federal activity laws. You're going to be able to do that on your own. And then you're going to see a video, Freakonomics of crack dealing. And your written assignment, remind you again, discussion post, mandatory sentencing for drug-related crimes. And then that's due tonight, initial, reply Saturday. Remember, you cannot post until see the posts until you have submitted your own. Make sure your posts are detailed, demonstrating critical thinking, and try to get them in on time. Remember, if a post is submitted on Sunday and you have not submitted an additional post by Saturday, you will get a 0. So if you submit 2 posts on Sunday, you're getting a 0. The reason for that is discussion forum is over. The written assignment, history of drugs and alcohol related legislation and policies, which we'll talk about. And then you have your quiz. That's due this Sunday. And then my motto is adversity is the springboard to success. You know about that because that's one of the announcements here that you can take a look at yourself. Okay, so that's the course announcement for this week. So now let's get into the module itself. And the first thing that I wanted to go over is the written assignment. Now, be aware that the module requires using that scenario. I mentioned it last week. This is it right here, and involve Dave. And if you haven't downloaded it, you can click on this and download it. I showed you last week all about that. So what you're going to do with this week is you're going to deal with explaining the drug schedule level, which, by the way, I went back and I put the information in about where you could find the schedule of drugs. And then I also sent you guys an email letting you know about that as well. Just to refresh your memory, let me go back for a minute to 1. When we got down here to dealing with the Controlled Substance Act, you remember when you got down here that you couldn't get any of this stuff, where I added this so that if you opened this, then you were able to get it, and then the statute. So I put that in there for you and then sent you an email about it as well. Okay, that's just to remind you from week 2. So let's get back to the assignment here. So you're going to explain the federal drug level that applies to each of Dave's drug uses. Describe what the federal and state laws regarding the legality of each drug use. Now, the state law that you're going to use is your own. Make sure to identify whatever state you're referencing, but we recommend using your own. You can use anyone. I don't care. But most students do better when they use their own state. And the reason, because you want to become familiar with your own state, if that's where you're planning on operating in your professional career. Compare how state and federal legislations concerning drug use, illegal use, and alcohol use differ from before 1996. We'll talk about that. Compare how law enforcement policies concerning drug abuse, alcohol, and as well prior to 1996, because there was a shift. And then finally identify the state and federal law enforcement policies that would impact Dave's sentencing, and identify the differences in today's sentencing. Remember, select a format for this, okay? And you're going to do this with a digital source. Infographic, please do not provide me with a form that is not a Word document. So what most people end up doing is they do a brochure or they do a flyer. The point of the matter is that it's got to be a Word document. There it is. It says it right here. You will lose points. And students say, well, why is the infographic in here? Infographic can be converted to a Word document. The fact of the matter is you got 3 different ways you can do it. Refer to the current literature. Okay, so you got to do some research. A minimum of 2 credible sources. APA, that means citations in the body and a reference page. I already went over that before, but I always will say it with a cover page. Now, be sure to understand this. The better papers have more than 2 credible sources, because remember what credible sources do, or citations, as we discussed last week. They provide credibility to your statements. They support your statements. They give strength to your statements, okay? And then spelling, grammar, and so forth. All right. And that's it. Now, let's look at the rubric. Now, I'm going to show you, I'm going to say this up front so you don't be confused. If you end up with no credible sources, you're going to end up in this column. Pay attention, you'll see it. It talks about credible sources and incomplete or incorrect explanation. That means you don't have any citations to support your position. Incomplete or incorrect comparisons, and missing details from credible sources. There it is again. Incomplete or incorrect information about this. No credible sources. You don't refer to the current literature to support your ideas. No credible sources. And then, so here's the deal. Don't ask me why you get a 55. your comment will be put in there at the bottom of the first section. What I usually do is have a comment in the grade book. And if you were to look at the grade book, you would see what I'm talking about. Okay. And you would see, okay, let me show you what the grade book looks like without showing you. I'm going to use a student, but it won't tell you what their grade is because I haven't graded any papers yet. But I'm going to do to show you what it's like. So this is the column that I teach from. This is the one I want you to operate on the basis of. Okay. Now, that's how that works. Now, let me leave this for a minute. Close this. Close that. And then I want to go to the grade book. Okay, now, this tells me the assignments. All right, now. This means that these are our students who've submitted their assignments. Okay, so now let me just use Joshua. Now, I'm not going to show you his assignment, but you'll see what I'm talking about. Okay, now, this is his assignment here, and I grade it. But here's what I do. I go to the rubric, and let's assume that he didn't have any credible sources. So he'll end up with emerging, incomplete. And then I'll put a comment right there where it says criterion feedback. That's where you see it. Okay. And I'll go down to each section. Now, generally what I do is I do the first section. I might not do every single section unless it's necessary. If there's no credible sources to, you'll see it down there. All right. So I'm just showing you where you will find my feedback. Now, if your assignment is submitted in late, it won't let me do it that way. So then I end up doing it up here by adding feedback in here, and then I'll save it and it'll show up. But that's how the grade book looks that you need to see. All right. So now let's get out of this. All right. Coming out of that. So I want to come back and reload. So everybody got it. And see, that's that. So inevitably students say, well, where did I go wrong? You'll see your points, but you'll also see my comments where I showed you. All right. So let me sign in here. Okay, let me go back and make sure I'm sharing, because I have to go back and share it again. Okay, now it's sharing. This is showing the courses. Week 2. All right. So now you see what I'm talking about. All right. Now, so this is the discussion. So you got the Controlled Substances Act and equivalent state laws, and it talks about sentences, and you're going to conduct research about more mandatory sentencing for drug-related. Review the scenario below. For your first post, you're going to either agree or disagree about Mary's receiving the mandatory sentence, and so forth. Okay, so you're going to read this fact pattern. I'm not going to comment about it because I want you to do that. All right. All right. So then that's due, as I told you already. Then you have your quiz, which I will not click on because it will show the quiz itself. Then your live classroom recording will be where you'll see the link to get the recording that we're doing right now. Live classroom lecture, that's where you click on and type in your answer, your information, and then it will be put into the Dropbox and you'll get your points if you have the right one. Okay, that's due Sunday. Any questions about the assignments? Okay, no questions. All right, so now you understand too where you find your feedback as well, because you saw that now. All right, so now let's talk about this and this pretty quickly, and then I want to do this video here. Okay, so hold on. So here's the deal. The laws are set up to try to deal with those individuals who are what we call dealers. Now, there are two kinds of dealers. There are what we call dealers who use and dealers who are business people. All right. And they use people to be out into the streets to distribute the drugs, but they are not users. The law, as far as determining the sentence, whether or not it's difficult, whether it's long, should be primarily given to those individuals. One of the problems has been is that unfortunately individuals who use drugs get caught in it as well. And what that does is it results in overcrowding. So drugs like methamphetamine is not grown, it's cooked, as we talk about here, like crack cocaine. And it includes all kind of ingredients, like it mentions here. Just get in your mind, this stuff is going into something that marijuana, cocaine, and heroin. Think about what I'm about to say. Ether or paint thinner. Paint thinner. This is going in your body. Acetone, uh, anhydrous ammonia, iodine crystals, red phosphorus. Look, drain cleaner, just read that one, and battery acid. Imagine that. This is what is mixed in. And then you have ephedrine or pseudoephedrine, which is stuff that's in cold medicine that's mixed in. What these do, these are mind altering things. And people smoke, inject, or snort these things. And as a result, uh, they, they lose their lives or they lose their minds, like I already told you. Sometimes before they lose their life, they lose their mind. And these labs uh, are they assembled and disassembled real fast. They're in all kinds of places dealing with crack cocaine. You'll find it in houses where it's cooked on the stove, and it is turns into a rock thing. Looks almost like the old starch that during my era people would chew that starch, but it's actually not chewed pretty much. It's ground up, and then people um, ingest it, or they um, smoke it, or uh, they, like I said, they snort it, inject it with needles, and it they use things like creek water or dirty water and stuff to do that. The needles are used. And so what has happened is that in order to try to combat against this, the methamphetamine epidemic act of 2005 was the way you had what was used to make meth, such as these items that I mentioned, were regulated so that when people would go and get them, particularly those cough things, were behind the counter or in a locked cabinet. You ever wondered about that? You go to drugstores. When I was younger, you didn't have that. You could go pull it off the shelf. But if you were buying this stuff, you had to sign a book and your name, address, you had to produce ID. And what they did was if they saw too many times you were doing it, then you were probably doing it because you were a manufacturer of one of these drugs. Okay. And so, I mean, this was an attempt to crack down on these uh, drug labs. Okay. Now, laws that came about, like the Methamphetamine Epidemic Act combat, they only work so much. They only go so far. Mexican drug trafficking organizations are big manufacturers and distributors to cities throughout. So the question that exists is, are you aware of drug precursor laws that have been passed to restrict the purchase of these items that I mentioned? Do you think that they might have an impact on meth production and related criminal activity? The answer is yes, but it's not a whole lot. And so that's one of the steps that's taken to try to fight off this stuff. The next thing that we're going to talk about is synthetic drugs. You should be aware that one of the things that contribute to the epidemic of opioid crisis and dealing with overdoses and drug use is what we call synthetic cannabinoids. And uh, these things um, are created in labs. Remember, the other one was created in labs, and people end up going on trips. I mean, literally out of their mind. Like when I was a kid, they had purple haze is a big one, and people would just lose their minds. But this synthetic cannabinoid, and the reason why they say cannabinoids is because it's oftentimes used in the place of marijuana and sold under names like K2, Spice, and it's sold in convenience stores. If you look at it down here, you can go on the internet and you can find it as well. And they can't be detected in drug screening or urinalysis. So individuals use these, but they're losing their minds when they do so. And so people get poisoned and they have effects that look, their heart rate and blood pressure change, unconsciousness, seizures, hallucination. Think about it, what it does. It sends you on a trip. It puts you out of your mind. And so what has happened is that the Synthetic Drug Abuse Prevention Act places 26 of these cannabinoids into Schedule 1 of the Controlled Substance Act. And then 43 states have taken action to control synthetic cannabinoids. You want to look and see if your state is one of them. Before 2010, they weren't controlled by any state. So we're talking about something that's this has come into existence in the last 12 years. Okay, so it is important for you to understand it. Then we talk about bath salts. This is another manufactured drug. It's not salts, but because it is labeled as like plant food, air freshener, in order to trick purchasers into thinking the drugs are mild, but they're not. People snort them, sniff them, and they have the same kind of problems. They get delusional, suicidal. People jump off of out of windows, all kinds of things. Um, the same kind of issues that we talked about earlier. Then they mentioned about the zombie attacks, where people do crazy things like bite the ears off of people. I'm not talking about Mike Tyson type thing. I don't know what that was, but anyway, bath salts generally, and this happens in the streets uh, by individuals. Okay, you see they put a line of it and then they snort it. So there's been legislation to come along to try to um, deal with the issue of synthetic cannabinoids, um, but it's kind of difficult because it's smuggled into the country from overseas. Okay. Uh, so we try to fight it with education, but as I explain to people, I says, don't do it. If you try it, you're going to get hooked on it. All right. So now that's what I want to say about that. This you're going to do on your own because I'm getting ready to go into this video. And you can do this knowledge check dealing with the laws and so forth. I'm going to leave that to you and you can use that for a study tool. Okay. Now, if you do your reading, you will do it, have it. So now I'm going to take time and I want to go to this video and this is a TED Talk and I'm going to take my headset off and actually I'm going to stop my video. I want to come to it. Let's see. Oh, here you go. Stop video. So then you'll just see there. So let's take a look at this video. It's has some language in it. It's about 21 minutes or so. So it's close to the time. So I'm going to put this on for you. I'm going to take my earphones off. It shows you how it operates as a business. Okay. And okay, it's all set. Okay, good. So we're all set. All right, so let's get ready for this. It's going to be a closed caption too, so that you can.
Happy to know that I'll be talking not about my own tragedy, but other people's tragedy. It's a lot easier to be lighthearted about other people's tragedy than your own, and I want to keep in the spirit of the conference. So if you believe the media accounts, being a drug dealer in the height of the crack cocaine epidemic was a very glamorous life, in the words of Virginia Pastrell. There's money, there's drugs, guns, women, you name it, jewelry, bling bling. It had it all. Right? What I'm going to tell you today is that, in fact, based on 10 years of research, a unique opportunity to go inside a gang, to see the actual books, the financial records of the gang, that the answer turns out not to be that being in the gang was a glamorous life, but I think more realistically, that being in a gang, selling drugs for a gang, is perhaps the worst job in all of America. And that's what I'd like to convince you of today. Okay, so there are three things I want to do. First, I want to explain how and why crack cocaine had such a profound influence on inner city gangs. Secondly, I want to tell you how somebody like me came to be able to see the inner workings of a gang. It's an interesting story, I think. And then third, I want to tell you in a very superficial way about some of the things we found when we actually got to look at the financial records, the books of the gang. Okay, so before I do that, just one warning, which is that this presentation has been rated R by the Motion Picture Association of America. It contains adult themes, adult language, given who's up on the stage, you'll be delighted to know that, in fact, there'll be no nudity, barring a unexpected wardrobe malfunctions aside. Okay. 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 So let me start by talking about crack cocaine and how it transformed the gang. Okay. And to do that, you have to actually go back to a time before crack cocaine in the early 80s and look at it from the perspective of a gang leader. Okay. So being a gang leader in the inner city wasn't such a bad deal in the mid-'80s, the early 80s, some say. Now, you had a lot of power, you got to beat people up, you got a lot of prestige, a lot of respect. But the thing is, there was no money in it. Okay? The gang had no way to make money. You couldn't charge dues to the people in the gang because the people in the gang didn't have any money. You couldn't really make any money selling marijuana. Marijuana's too cheap, it turns out. There's just no market for being. You can't get rich selling marijuana. You couldn't sell cocaine. Well, cocaine's a great product, powder cocaine, but you got to know rich white people. And most of the inner city gang members didn't know any rich white people. They couldn't sell to that market. You couldn't really do petty crime either. Turns out petty crime's a terrible way to make a living. So as a result, as a gang leader, you had, power. It's a pretty good life. But the thing was, in the end, you were living at home with your mother. And so it wasn't really a career. There was something that, it's just there were limits to how powerful and important you could be if you had to live at home with your mother. Okay. Then along comes crack cocaine. Okay. And in the words of Malcolm Gladwell, crack cocaine was the extra chunky version of tomato sauce for the inner city. Okay? Because crack cocaine was an unbelievable innovation. I don't have time to talk about it today. But if you think about it, I would say that in the last 25 years, of every invention or innovation that's occurred in this country, the biggest one in terms of impact on the well-being of people who live in the inner city was crack cocaine. Okay? It's for the worse, not for the better, for the worse. It had a huge impact on life. So what was it about crack cocaine? It was a brilliant way of getting the brain high. Okay? Because you could smoke crack cocaine and you can smoke crack cocaine, you can't smoke powder cocaine. And smoking is a much more efficient mechanism of delivering a high than is snorting it. And it turned out there was this audience that didn't know it wanted crack cocaine, but when it came, it really did. And it was a perfect drug you could buy the cocaine that went in for $1, sell it for $5, highly addictive. The high was very short. So for 15 minutes, you get this great high. And then when you come down, all you want to do is get high again. Okay, it created a wonderful market. And for the people who were there running the gang, it was a great way, seemingly, to make a lot of money, at least for the people on the top. Okay, so this is where we enter the picture. Not really me. I'm really a big player in all this. My co-author, Sudhir Venkatesh, is the main character. Okay, so he was a math major in college who had a good heart and decided he wanted to get a sociology PhD, came to the University of Chicago. So the 3 months before he came to Chicago, he had spent following the Grateful Dead. In his own words, he looked like a freak. Okay? He's a South Asian, very dark-skinned South Asian, big man, and he had hair, in his words, down to his ass. Okay? Defied all kinds of boundaries. Was he black or white? Was he man or woman? It was really a curious sight to be seen. So he showed up at the University of Chicago, and the famous sociologist William Julius Wilson was doing a book that involved surveying people all across Chicago. And he took one look at Sudhir, who was going to go do some surveys for him, and decided he knew exactly the place to send him, which was to one of the toughest, most notorious housing projects, not just in Chicago, but in the entire United States. So Sudhir, the suburban boy who never really been in the inner city, dutifully took his clipboard and, walked down to this housing project, gets to the first building. First building, well, there's nobody there, but he hears some voices up in the stairwell. So he climbs up the stairwell, and he comes around the corner and finds a group of young African-American men playing dice. Okay. This is about 1990, peak of the crack epidemic. This is a very dangerous job being in a gang. You don't like to be surprised. You don't like to be surprised by people coming around the corner. And the mantra was, shoot first, ask questions later. Okay. Now, Sudhir was lucky. He was such a freak. And that clipboard probably saved his life, because he figured no other rival gang member would be coming up to shoot at them with a clipboard. So his greeting was not particularly warm, but they did say, well, okay, let's hear your question. So I kid you not, the first question on the survey that he was sent to ask was, How do you feel about being born black? Makes you wonder about academics, okay? So the choices of answers were very good. Yeah, very good. What Sadir found out is, in fact, that the real answer was the following. The survey was not, in the end, going to be what got Sadir off the hook. He was held hostage overnight in the stairwell. There was a lot of gunfire. There were a lot of philosophical discussions he had with the gang members. By morning, the gang leader arrived, checked out Sadir, decided he wasn't no threat, and they'd let him go home. So Sadir went home, took a shower, took a nap. And you and I, probably faced with a situation, would think, well, I guess I'm going to write my dissertation on the Grateful Dead. I've been following for the last 3 months. Sadir, on the other hand, got right back, walked down to the housing project, went up to the floor, the second floor, and said, hey guys, I had so much fun hanging out with you last night. I wonder if I could do it again tonight. And that was the beginning, what turned out to be a beautiful relationship that involved Sadir living in the housing project on and off for 10 years, hanging out in crack houses, going to jail with the gang members, having the car window shot out of his car, having the police break into his apartment and steal his computer disks, you name it. But ultimately, the story has a happy ending for Sadir, who became one of the most respected sociologists in the country. And especially for me, as I sat in my office with my Excel spreadsheet open, waiting for Sadir to come and deliver to me the latest load of data that he would get from the game. It's one of the most unequal co-authoring relationships ever, but I was glad to be the beneficiary of it. Okay, so what do we find? What do we find in the gang? Well, let me say one thing. So what we really got access to everybody in the gang. You know, we got an inside look at the gang from the very bottom up to the very top. They trusted Sadir in ways that really no academic has ever, or really anybody, any outsider has ever earned the trust of these gangs. To the point where they actually opened up what was most interesting for me is their books, their financial records that they kept, and they made them available to us. We not only could study them, but we could ask them questions about what was in them. So if I have to kind of summarize very quickly in the short time I have, what the sort of the bottom line of what I take away from the gang is that if I had to draw a parallel between the gang and any other organization, it would be that the gang is just like McDonald's in a lot of different respects, the restaurant McDonald's. Okay, so first, in one way, which isn't maybe the most interesting way, but it's a good way to start, is in the way it's organized, the hierarchy of gang, the way it looks. So here's what the org chart of the gang looks like. I don't know if any of you know very much about org charts, but if you were to kind of strip down and simplify McDonald's org chart, this is exactly what the org chart would look like. Now, it's amazing, but the top level of the gang, they actually call themselves the board of directors. Okay? And Sadir says, it's not like these guys had a very sophisticated kind of view of like what happened in American corporate life, but they had seen movies like Wall Street, and they kind of had learned like a little bit about what it was like to be in the real world. Now, below that board of directors, you've got essentially what are regional VPs, people who control, say, the south side of Chicago, or the west side of Chicago. Now, Sadir got to know very well the guy who had the unfortunate assignment of trying to take the Iowa franchise, which it turned out for this black gang was not one of the more brilliant financial endeavors that they undertook. Okay? But the thing that really makes the gang seem like McDonald's, it's its franchisees. That the guys who are running, the local gangs, the 4 square block by 4 square block areas, they're just like the guys, in some sense, who are running the McDonald's. They are the entrepreneurs. They get the exclusive property rights, get control of the drug selling. They get the name of the gang behind them for merchandising and marketing. And they're the ones who basically make the profit or lose the profit, depending on how good they are at running the business. Now, the group I really want you to think about, though, are the ones at the bottom, the foot soldiers. Okay, these are the teenagers typically who'd be standing out on the street corners selling the drugs. Extremely dangerous work. And important to note that almost all of the weight, all of the people in this organization are at the bottom. Okay, just like McDonald's. So in some sense, the foot soldiers are a lot like the people who are taking the order of McDonald's. And it's not just by chance they're like them. In fact, in these neighborhoods, they'd be the same people. So the same kids who were working in the gang were actually, at the very same time, they would typically be working part-time at a place like McDonald's, okay? Which already, I think, foreshadows the main result that I've talked about what a crappy job it was being in the gang. Because obviously, if being in the gang was such a wonderful, lucrative job, why in the world would these guys moonlight at McDonald's, okay? So what do the wages look like? So you might be surprised, but based on the actual, being able to talk to them and to see their records, this is what it looks like in terms of the wages. The hourly wage the foot soldiers were earning was $3.50 an hour. It was below the minimum wage. Okay, and this is well documented. It's easy to see by the patterns of consumption they have. It really is not fiction, it's fact. There was very little money in the gang, especially at the bottom. Now, if you manage to rise up, say, and be that local leader, the guy who's equivalent of the McDonald's franchisee, you'd be making $100,000 a year. And that, in some ways, was the best job you could hope to get if you were growing up in one of these neighborhoods as a young black male. If you managed to rise to the very top, $200,000 or $400,000 a year is what you'd hope to make. Truly, you would be a great success story. And one of the sad parts of this is that, indeed, among the many other ramifications of crack cocaine, is that the most talented individuals in these communities, this is what they were striving for. They weren't trying to make it in legitimate ways because there were no legitimate channels out. This was the best way out. And it actually was the right choice, probably, to try to make it out this way. You look at this, the relationship with McDonald's breaks down here. The money looks about the same. Why is it such a bad job? Well, the reason it's such a bad job is that there's somebody shooting at you a lot of the time. Okay? So we're shooting at you. What are the death rates? Okay? We found in our gang, and admittedly, this was not really sort of a standard situation. This was a game of a time of intense violence, of a lot of gang wars, as this gang actually became quite successful, but there were costs. And so the death rate, not to mention the rate of being arrested, sent to prison, being wounded, the death rate in our sample was 7% per person per year. You're in the gang for 4 years, you expect to die with about a 25% likelihood. Okay? That is about as high as you can get. So just for comparison's purposes, let's think about some other walk of life where you may expect might be extremely risky. Like, let's say that you were a murderer and you were convicted of murder and you're sent to death row. Turns out the death rates on death row from all causes, including the execution, 2% a year. Okay? So it's a lot safer being on death row than it is selling drugs out on the street. Okay? That makes you pause, gives you some pause, those of you who believe that the death penalty is going to have an enormous deterrent effect on crime. Now, to give you a sense of just how bad the inner city was during crack, and I'm not really talking about, I'm not really focusing on the negatives, but there's another story to tell you there. If you look at the death rates just of random young black males growing up in the inner city of the United States, the death rates during crack were about 1%. That's extremely high. This is violent death. It's unbelievable in some sense. Put it into perspective, if you compare this to the soldiers in Iraq, for instance, right now, fighting the war, 0.5%. So in some very literal way, the young black men who were growing up in this country were living in a war zone, very much in the sense of the way that the soldiers over in Iraq are fighting a war. Okay, so why in the world, you might ask, would anybody be willing to stand out on the street corner selling drugs for $3.50 an hour with a 25% chance of dying over the next 4 years? Why would they do that? Okay? And I think there are a couple answers. I think the first one is that they got fooled by history. It used to be the gang was a rite of passage, that the young people controlled the gang, that as you got older, you dropped out of the gang. So what happened was the people who happened to be in the right place at the right time, people who happened to be leading the gang in the mid to late 80s became very, very wealthy. And so the logical thing to think was that, well, the next generation, so they're going to age out of the gang like everybody always has, and the next generation is going to take over and get the wealth. Okay? So there's striking similarities, I think, to the internet boom. Right? The first set of people in Silicon Valley got very, very rich. Then all my friends said, maybe I should go do that too. And they were willing to work very cheap for stock options that never came. Okay? In some sense, that's what happened exactly to the set of people we were looking at. It's that they were willing to start at the bottom, just like, say, a lawyer at a law firm, a first-year lawyer, is willing to start at the bottom, work 80-hour weeks for not that much money because they think they're going to make partner. But what happened was the rules changed and they never got to make partner. Indeed, the same people who were running all of the major gangs in the late 1980s are still running the major gangs in Chicago today. They never passed on any of the wealth. So everybody got stuck at that $3.50 an hour job, and it turned out to be a disaster. The other thing the gang was very, very good at was marketing and trickery. And so, for instance, one thing the gang would do is, the gang leaders would have big entourages. They drive fancy cars and have fancy jewelry. So what Sadira eventually realized as he hung out with them more is that really they didn't own those cars, they just leased them because they couldn't afford to own the fancy cars. And they didn't really have gold jewelry, they had gold plated jewelry. It goes back to the real versus the fake real. And really, they did all sorts of things to trick the young people into thinking what a great deal the gang was going to be. So, for instance, they would give a 14-year-old kid, they'd give him a whole, roll of bills to hold. That 14-year-old kid would say, oh, well, he would say to his friends, hey, look at all the money I got in the gang. It wasn't his money until he spent it, and then essentially he was in debt to the gang or was sort of an indentured servant for a while. Okay, so I have a couple minutes. Let me do one other thing I hadn't thought I'd have time to do, which is to talk about what we learn more generally about economics from the study of the game. Okay, so economists tend to talk in technical words. Often our theories fail quite miserably when we go to the data. But actually, what's kind of interesting is that in this setting, it turned out that some of the economic theories that worked not so well in the real economy work very well in the drug economy, in some sense because it's unfettered capitalism. Here's an economic principle. This is one of the basic ideas in labor economics called the compensating differential. It's the idea that basically you increment the wages that a worker requires to leave him indifferent between performing two tasks, one which is more unpleasant than the other. That's what you call a compensating differential. It's why we think garbage men might be paid more than people who work in parks. Okay? So in the words of the gang, one of the members of the gang, I think, makes this clear. So it turns out, I'm sort of getting ahead of myself, it turns out in the gang, when there's a war going on, that they actually pay the foot soldiers twice as much money. Okay, it's exactly this concept, because they're not willing to be at risk. So here's, in the words of the gang member, captures it quite nicely. He says, would you stand around here when all this shit, that means shooting, if all this shit's going on? No, right. So if I'm going to be asked to put my life on the line, then front me the cash, man. So essentially, I think the gang member says it much more articulately than does the economist about what's going on. Here's another one. So economists talk about game theory, that every two-person game has a Nash equilibrium. Here's the translation you get from the gang member. They're talking about the decision of why they don't go shoot. One thing it turns out to be a great business tactic in the gang is to go and just shoot in the air, just shoot guns in the other gang's territory. All the people are afraid to go by the guns there, they're going to come into your neighborhood. So, but here's what he says about why they don't do that. He says, if we start shooting around there in the other gang's territory, nobody, and I mean you dig it, nobody going to step on their turf. But we got to be careful because they can shoot around here too, and then we all fucked. Okay, so that's exactly the same concept. But then again, sometimes economists get it wrong. So one thing we observed in the data is that it looked like, in terms of the gang leader always got paid. Okay, he always, no matter how bad it was economically, he always got himself paid. So we had some theories related to cash flow and lack of access to capital markets and things like that. And then we asked the gang member, well, why is it you always get paid and your workers don't always get paid? His response is, got all these niggers below you who want your job, you dig? If you start taking losses, and see you as weak and shit. Okay? I thought about it. I said, CEOs often pay themselves $1 million bonuses even when companies are losing a lot of money. And it never really occurred to economists that this idea of weak and shit could really be important. So maybe weak and shit. Maybe weak and shit is an important hypothesis. Thank you very much.
Okay. That is very appropriate for what we're talking about here, how individuals find themselves being hooked on drugs. And also with gangs, I was a lawyer for several gangs. So the way he described the way that they think and operate is exactly correct. The key thing is that what they are doing is they're providing a service. And with crack cocaine, it was a cheap high, and that was the thing that I was talking about. That the town Fort Heights was one of the poorest towns in the state of Illinois, next to East St. Louis and another town downstate. But the fact of the matter is that even the police department, which I was an investigator in, the chief of police ended up going to the penitentiary for um, being on the payroll of crack dealers, drug dealers, and ended up eventually going to the penitentiary. But my point to you is this, so you understand the dynamics of this, is that um, as the laws are passed to try to stop things, the things that happen in the streets actually um, controlled a lot of this. And crack cocaine has been around a long time, but now we are climbing to the level of an epidemic with opioids and dealing with the synthetic drugs and things of that nature. But it's been a long time in the minority community where I grew up as a kid, part of town on the west side of Chicago, the south side of Chicago, and some of these suburban communities, Harvey, Dixmoor, Phoenix, Robbins, just to name a few that are in Illinois here. And as a person who worked in law enforcement as well as being an attorney, I saw uh, what was going on. It is, and those gang leaders, they didn't retire. They just bring on some new blood. And like you said, they would just throw a little money at them. And those kids uh, didn't have a lot. And so they would also, something else they didn't mention here, they would provide things like tennis shoes. They would fake jewelry, like they were talking about, and things like glitter. And so what happened is that um, we found ourselves in a situation where it was financially uh, feasible for these individuals who were leaders and get these individuals. You notice one of the things that happened is that the young people would spend the money and then they became involuntary servants or involved in what we call slavery or involuntary servitude, where they had to pay back, and they never really uh, had a chance to pay back. But it was really something. They would provide money for the lawyers that um, took care of the legal issues for the street soldiers, pretty much, and the lieutenants, and that whole chart there. I mean, I actually have seen these people, if they were to apply some of the principles and concepts that they did in distribution of drugs, man, they would be able to have uh, major corporations that would be legal. But that's the way it is. And so what we learned today is, so you understand, is why we have the dilemma that we have today. Um, Predatory activities that feed up on poor, uneducated individuals from all walks of life, but primarily fester in the minority community. Let me tell you something that used to happen, and I'm not joking about what I'm about to tell you. In Ford Heights, when we busted people who were from uh, wealthy suburbs who would come there to get the drugs. They would be in danger, but they still would come and get the drugs. So the point of the matter is, and they weren't taking enough to distribute. They were using it. They were using it. And so what happens is that these people find themselves being slaves to the situation. So anyway, that's what I wanted to share with you tonight. Um, so you get a perspective of why, as somebody says, it's like the slippery slope. It's like you put money out, you're passing laws, legislation, but you still got these people who are um, like lemmings. They're just following the leader, and they end up stuck like a gerbil on the wheel. So that's the issue with drugs, and as a result of that, individuals, as I say, still commit crimes to support their habits. Well, any questions about anything tonight? Type in the chat box if you have any questions. Madison. Yeah, you leave it to Madison. What uh, what what do you have? Have a suggestion? Because I have one. Okay, that's good, but that's not it. That's not it. It's an overwhelming problem. Yes, we did, but we talked about more like in that area. But there's a particular way that affects so many people. As soon as I say this, you should get it, that it's affordable for people to get their hands on it, to use it. Close. That's part of it. There we go. Well, it's crack, not carc, but I know what you meant. It's crack cocaine. Crack cocaine. And as I said, I have a personal reason for it. And probably some of you may have some personal issues that you're oh, Madison says she fixed it. But yes, so it's crack cocaine. Give me crack cocaine and you will have your points tonight. So Korea and F. Miller and Lindsay and Lynn and of course Madison. See Madison uh, and I think Lindsay and Lynn, but especially Madison, know where I'm coming from already with these key phrases. But yes, so give me that and you'll have your points. So anyway, I'm going to let you guys go. I appreciate you coming out. Thank you for spending this time. I appreciate five people. Well, that's outstanding. Uh, you guys, thank you. You have a great night. Stay safe, and I will see you next Tuesday at 7 o'clock p.m. Get those assignments in, and you know the rule about reaching me. If you don't, you can call me, text me, email me any hour of the day, except which hour. Which hour should you do not do that? Watch. I knew Madison was going to do that. And Lynn, okay. My veterans, as I call them. Okay. Salute to you guys. Good night, guys. Take care. I'll see you next week. Good night.